Alright, so I'm going to start this out with 3 prefaces before we get to the book review. The first one is that this sound quality is probably going to be unusual. I'm testing out recording this in the library. There's a moderate amount of noise pollution because I'm in the area where people tend to have like team meetings and stuff for small businesses and organizations and such. And actually there's one of those going on in the next room. So there might be some sound pollution, but mostly it won't come down to much. I think it's just that they're Skyping someone in the next room, which is where you'll hear that sort of robotic voice, and they're trying to talk loud to get them to hear them, but whatever. It's not like I'm not being noisy for the library too. I'm in a private study room though, so it's sort of excusable as long as I go just below a talking voice, which is what I'm doing. I'm also testing the second preface is that I'm testing a higher quality recording format, which is where I pin the little mic, on the outside of my jacket, actually pretty up close around my chest area and point it directly towards me, which is not what I was doing before. But I found that if I talk below a talking voice, like right now, you can hear me really, really clearly, but only if there's a minimal amount of noise pollution. So this isn't a thing I can do often, or at least I don't think I can, but it's something I'm testing out. And the third thing is you might be wondering why this video is here instead of the second major update video. I didn't mention it in the video because I didn't decide it until I was done editing and uploading the video, but I'm gonna make those weekly, so 3 videos, once a week. It'll be Thursday, 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 and then for Monday, 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 I'll have regular content. In the next one, I'll be explaining my digital and, well, my setup pertaining to how it's done, or how it's turned into these videos rather than how the content itself is made and with what tools. Alright, so hey, only 2 minutes and 30 seconds. That's half what my usual explaining things at the beginning of videos tends to be. So as to this video, this isn't going to be the normal book review, not that there really is one. I think I've done, 2, 3 of these now. So I guess I'm still in the defining normal phase. I'll be actually reviewing a graphic novel. Again, I want to get back to some stuff that I like to read. Unfortunately, this isn't one of those. But then I guess that will separate me from the normal, where people will only really make book reviews for one of 2 reasons, or they already had a plan to do it before they started reading the book, although that alters your perception of the book, and I don't think I'm going to do that if I can help it. If I'm going into it knowing that I'm going to try and review it, if nothing else, you're more critical. Or it's because they really like the book. Now, sometimes you get videos like this one where it's just someone read a thing and hated it so much that they had to talk about it, like what I'm doing now and what I did for the Canticle for Leibowitz, which I actually found out a person whose opinion I very much trust recently told me that it's their favorite book of all time, so now I'm getting really conflicted about both them and the book. Apparently there's some sort of 600 years later part right after where I stopped. I don't know if that's enough to bring me back to it, but I know it's enough to make me doubt it. But as for this book, it's bad. I mean, it's a graphic novel, and graphic novels can be given a certain amount of leeway for the plot, because if nothing else, to make a graphic novel, you either have to be rich enough to pay an artist, be an artist yourself, or be close friends with an artist who's willing to basically partner and you basically put a year or 2 of their life into it. Now, I don't know which one of those this is, but it's from Imagine Comics, which just the sheer fact that I haven't heard of it tells me that in the very least it's probably not one of those places that's willing to fun comics out of hand, chances are, in the very least, you have to make the first one first. And this thing is, you know, for a fully colored thing, it's not that short. It doesn't have page numbers. I mean, it's a graphic novel, I suppose that makes sense, but I don't know, I'd say something like 50 to 100 pages, somewhere in that range. So it would have taken a cartoonist a lot of time. So the problem with this isn't, you gotta understand that I'm not trying to degrade people's attempts at creating things. Like, to the artist, I say good job, great job, I like your art style, actually. I guess, so the book in question, I mean, it's in the title, but the full name of it is They're Not Like Us, and then the series, which I probably won't end up putting in the title, is Black Holes for the Young. So, I don't know, I saw some young 20-somethings and a huge crowd of people, and with an interesting art style, and I'm like, okay, sure, I'll try this. The problem isn't with the art, it's with the story. Now, I don't know if this is a situation of, like, the artist, for reference, it's got 4 people on the credits, right below this is the first volume of it, and it's got Eric Stephenson, Simon Gain, Jordi Bellafair, and Phonographics, which I'm assuming is a company, because it's one word. Yeah, so I'm gonna assume that they had one of these 3 people who weren't a company were separate and were writing, were doing the plot, and that person's maybe should look into more training, I should say. I don't think because you've done a bad job on one thing you should stop doing your industry, or at least I'm trying not to think that way, but look into more training. The problem with this thing is that its story, its plot is really basic, but they did it badly. It kind of ruins the whole story. The basic plot is that, basically it's about people who hear voices in their head. It's the traditional, you're not crazy, you're just one of us, and we have magic powers types of stories. But unlike those kinds of stories usually end up, instead of trying to hide themselves from the rest of the world, although they still sort of do that, these guys take a much more aggressive perspective. I can sort of see it. I can even see, the way they explained it is, societies tend to view things as threats if they're different. The easiest way to view this is the fact that things like racism exist. And I get it. I get their philosophy, and I would get why they would want to hide in the case of it's people who hear voices in their heads, but it's actually like they can actually read people's minds or convince people that they have, or depending on what power they have, like they can convince people that they are seeing something they're not, or in the case I don't know how this connects to reading people's minds, but one of them can control fire, but you know, it doesn't really matter how they have the magic powers, just that they have the magic powers. It's basically guided towards teens, and teens, not to generalize too much, not to generalize, but generally, teens tend to just not care. I mean, I was very recently a teen, and I can tell you, it slowly started seeping into me, this cynicism of, well, why does this guy have fire? Why can this guy control fire or whatever? When your whole explanation for the powers was that they are related to schizophrenia, and schizophrenia is not actually real, it's that these people are legitimately telepathic. So that was flag 1, but that's, you know, they don't want to explain it too much, and really it doesn't matter. What the major flag was, the way they handled it. They brought the main character after a suicide attempt, because she kept hearing voices in her head and she thought she was just crazy, to this huge mansion. And, you know, It's par for the course. They don't have to explain how they have a huge mansion, except they do. They explain everybody's powers and they explain the rules, which basically comes down to don't be too suspicious looking, things like no piercings or tattoos, no colorful hair. We just want people who can fit into a crowd, which again, understandable. It's a little strange that a teen novel is going for the you have to be normal, not abnormal approach, but okay, sure. It's got your expectable multiracial cast. And, well, the problem starts there, and it doesn't stop. What it really comes down to is what they say next, which is that they don't have some mission, they're not actively trying to survive. As far as I can tell, there isn't even really an enemy. I mean, they sort of vaguely set up a mystery plot at the end of it, sort of thrown in at the end. I mean, this is a first issue, so I can understand how it's mostly just explaining the world, but and that's another thing, by the way. I don't really mind when these sorts of things take oh, your character has amnesia, or your character has no idea what's going on, so this is why we're going to explain every single aspect of the world to you. Now, I know a lot of people just don't like that and want more creative approaches to world building. I don't really mind, but I should point out that it does that, and it's very cliche. It's very cliche on top of the you're not crazy, you're just one of us, and we're the few who have magic powers, and we all just so happen to be very highly attractive teens. The thing that pointed me out to this book is, despite that plot, they're not teens, or if they are teens, they're something like, I think the youngest one might be 15 maybe, and the oldest one is probably 35. So they're young adults. What they meant by the series title, Black Holes for the Young, it seems, isn't black holes for the 16-year-olds with a couple 18-year-olds thrown in as wise elders. What it means is apparently young adults, which can, it can attribute to me, and you can probably see how this would be interesting to me in a world where basically everyone's 40 or 17 in fiction. Seeing something where someone's actually 25 or something it's nice. All right, I've been sort of beating around the bush about why I really don't like this book, and it's because they explain pretty much that instead of having a villain or having a government who hates them, or the government does hate them, but they've pretty much been able to not be found out, they explain that basically their lifestyle just consists of doing whatever they want, which on its own is a big major flag. But then they proceed to show you the characters going up to a random guy in a poor neighborhood, just waiting at a bus stop, and beating him up and taking all his stuff. And the thing that annoys me the most and finally convinced me that, okay, I am going to make a book review about this, despite it being a graphic novel, not a book, and the fact that it only took me like 30 minutes to read the whole thing. Despite all that, the thing which finally convinced me to do it is that they took his phone. Now, I understand that we're addicted to our phones nowadays, but one of the rules they explained to avoid anonymity is that you're supposed to give up your old phone. And, well, the thing is, it's, I understand they're trying to not be found out or whatever, but in this scene, or in these scenes, they took the guy's phone just because they could. They were really driving home the whole we do what we want part. And it's really hard to empathize with characters that are actively evil like this, are chaotic evil types, who do what they want because they can do it. Like, the thing is, they didn't walk up to some fat cat rich guy in the middle of the Beverly Hills or whatever the New York equivalent of this is, because I'm pretty sure it's happening in New York. They didn't do that. What they did is They walked up to a normal-looking guy in a poor neighborhood, looking tired after probably a long day at work, who's just looking to get home. And why did they steal from him? Oh, because one of the characters liked his vintage headphones. Not like, and mind you, I'm not that knowledgeable about headphones, but they didn't seem to be like custom modeled in it, vintage. They seem to literally just be that he must have gone to a garage sale or something and found someone's 15-year-old pair of huge over-the-ear headphones, which is, you know, it's the kind of thing where they're really driving home the point that these characters are chaotic evil. They are, we do what we want because we have power over you. And the way they did it, beating up this guy, by the way, is that the one of them who can make people see things they can't see, just made it look to all the people driving by that this guy was just completely happy to see them, just chuckling with some old friends. And the one who has, I guess, super strength, maybe, I can't tell. They said he's very strong and very fast or something like that, but his punches didn't seem to do anything more than the rest of them. He beat him up, and then the rest of them sort of kicked him and stuff. And then they took his stuff, and he said, please, just take my money, take whatever, but leave my phone. And they're like, no, they took it, even though they cannot use it. By their own rules, they can't use it. And this, the thing is, I get setting up characters. I get doing it differently. And I like the idea of trying to create these different characters. The problem is, the way they did it is by creating characters who are actively despisable. I do not like any of these characters, saving possibly the protagonist, and even her is just vague disdain, and that's just because she wasn't involved in beating the guy up. But on the other hand, she wasn't like questioning them after I'm the guy who explains the world and then disappears for the rest of the plot. After that character explains it to her, instead of being like, what, you're crazy, I don't want anything to do with you guys, instead of doing that, she's like, well, we do what we want because we can. That's not a good excuse. In a reasonable, you're halfway to convincing me voice, or at least that's how I read it. Yeah, so I don't really want to ramble on anymore about this book. What am I at, 17 minutes? Fine. Yeah, so this book is just bad. There's other attributes about it, like apparently one of the rules is that you have to literally, I looked for the point when they were being figurative about it, but apparently it's a literal rule, you have to kill your parents in order to, and any family members, in order to begin your new life. It's just straight up. They're gonna break into your house and have you kill your parents. And they did it later in the book, I think. They didn't actually show it, but they showed the characters going to their house and showing a false image, having that character show a false image of what was happening and then go in looking with smirks on and stuff. It's bad. It's bad, and I hate the characters, and honestly, I don't want to wish curses upon anyone, but I hope whoever wrote this book, in the very least, would just stick to cliches instead of picking out a couple of cliches and saying, we're going to do this in the exact opposite method, and then we're going to do the rest of these cliches traditionally. We're going to have the, you're not crazy, you're just one of us. We're going to have they're young people, except we're going to do it slightly differently, so they're like they're like 5 to 7 years older. We're going to do all that, we're going to do that. We're going to be cliche, we're going to do the character has no idea what's going on, so that's why we can spend the first issue explaining the world. We're going to do all these cliches, and then we want to change it up. We don't want to be totally cliche, so we're going to make our characters actively evil, and that's how we're going to be different. And honestly, it would have been better if they just said, and we're fighting these other guys who also have the same powers, and are evil, basically, because they're not us. There's a series, I think it was Shadowhunter it was called. I read like 1 or 2 of them back when I was 16 and 15. basically came down to the fact that like you're 16, you have magic powers because it actually turns out like you're a secret princess or whatever, or like the daughter of the rebel king of the shadow hunter people, and therefore you have magic powers. And then later on we're just going to give you extra magic powers that even the people with magic powers don't have, because why not? And if they would have stuck to a plot like that, it would have been fine. It would have been it would have been a 3-star book. Maybe 4-star if they'd still added a couple of things like this interesting drawing style, the fact that the characters aren't 16, they're something like 23 to 27. If they'd have stuck to those things, it would have been a solid 3.5-star book or comic, and that's fine. They build it up. At issue 10, they've got a solid following. But this book, I'm not hard to please when it comes to these graphic novels, and this appalled me. And I hope that, in the very least, I'm just never going to see it again. If they have an audience, there's people who like this, and there's people who this communicates the right message to, fine, whatever. I just hope I don't have to deal with it. All right. Yeah, that was a book review. Enjoy the generalized outro.